In a portrait of the artist as a young man, James Joyce traces Stephen Dedalus's journey from childhood to self-conscious artistry, chronicling his intellectual rebellion against family, nation, and religion. Among the figures who accompany him on this path, Cranley occupies a crucial position in the novel's final chapters. Though he appears late, Cranley serves as Stephen's final interlocutor before his symbolic flight from Ireland. He is not merely a friend or confidant. He represents the rational, ethical voice of Irish Catholic society, a voice that Stephen must confront and reject before achieving independence. Role in the narrative. Cranley's primary narrative role is to act as Stephen's confessor and sounding board during the climactic debates of the 5th chapter. The novel's earlier sections chart Stephen's intellectual evolution and isolation. By the final section, he requires an interlocutor, through whom his ideas can be articulated and tested. Cranley fills this function. He listens patiently to Stephen's arguments about religion, sin and freedom, probing his logic with a combination of irony and moral seriousness. Their conversations unfold like a secular confession. Stephen, who has abandoned the church, finds in Cranley a substitute priest, someone to whom he can express his inner conflicts about his mother's faith, his own skepticism, and his ambitions as an artist. When Stephen declares that he will not make his Easter duty, Cranley challenges him to consider the emotional consequences. Do you love your mother? The question pierces through Stephen's intellectual posturing and exposes the moral cost of his defiance. In this moment, Cranley represents the enduring voice of human compassion and moral reason, the voice that seeks to reconcile intellect with love and principle with empathy. As the novel progresses, however, the distance between the two men widens. Cranley's patience gradually turns to frustration, and his affection gives way to incomprehension. When Stephen insists that he must encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and forge in the smithy of his soul the uncreated conscience of his race, Cranley can only respond with silence and confusion. The dialogue ends without resolution. Stephen moves towards solitude and self-definition, while Cranley remains behind, the last link to the world of faith, friendship, and society that Stephen abandons. In this sense, Cranley serves as the final test of Stephen's independence. To complete his transformation into an artist, Stephen must assert his individuality even against his closest companion. Cranley's moral arguments, though sincere, represent the collective conscience Stephen must transcend. Symbolic significance. Symbolically, Cranley embodies reason, morality, and social conscience, the qualities that Stephen's artistic individualism must resist but cannot entirely dismiss. He is not a caricature of orthodoxy. Joyce presents him as intelligent, tolerant, and genuinely concerned for Stephen's well-being. Yet his worldview is grounded in a pragmatic acceptance of communal norms. He seeks coherence and compromise, whereas Stephen seeks purity and isolation. Cranley's symbolic importance thus lies in his function as a counterweight to Stephen's idealism. If Stephen represents the spirit of rebellion and creativity, Cranley represents the stabilizing force of friendship, duty, and faith. The tension between them dramatizes Joyce's larger theme, the conflict between the individual's quest for artistic freedom and the communal values of Irish Catholic life. Moreover, Cranley serves as a kind of secular Christ figure, an ironic counterpart to the divine figure Stephen has rejected. The very name Cranley may echo cranium, suggesting intellect or the head, in contrast to the spiritual heart that Stephen seeks to free from dogma. In their dialogues, Cranley becomes a confessor not through religious authority, but through empathy and reason. He listens, forgives, and even blesses Stephen's departure in his own way. Yet his rational compassion cannot offer the transcendence Stephen desires. Broader implications. Cranley's role carries broader implications for Joyce's vision of art, faith, and modernity. He represents the ethical residue of the religious tradition Joyce inherited. Even as Stephen rejects Catholic dogma, he cannot escape the moral structure it instilled in him, a structure personified by Cranley. The conversations between the two men reveal that the artist's liberation is not merely an intellectual act, but a moral ordeal. Cranley also stands for the community Stephen leaves behind. His inability to follow Stephen's reasoning mirrors Ireland's failure to understand or accommodate the artist. Yet Joyce does not ridicule him. Through Cranley, Joyce acknowledges the necessity of moral dialogue, even when it leads to separation. Stephen's departure is not triumphant but tinged with melancholy precisely because it means leaving behind figures like Cranley, the last embodiment of friendship, loyalty, and shared humanity. Furthermore, Cranley anticipates a recurring figure in Joyce's later works, the skeptical friend or double who anchors the artist in reality. In Ulysses, the character of Leopold Bloom plays a similar role toward the adult Stephen. Patient, questioning, humane. Cranley, in this sense, is Stephen's first encounter with a moral interlocutor who challenges solipsism. Joyce thus uses Cranley to dramatize the perpetual tension between the artist's inner world and the ethical demands of human society. Conclusion. Cranley's quiet presence at the end of A Portrait of the Artist as a young man gives human depth to Stephen's intellectual rebellion. He is not a mere secondary character, but the embodiment of reasoned faith, friendship, and moral responsibility, the final obstacle and final comfort on Stephen's path to artistic selfhood. As the mirror of Stephen's conscience, Cranley exposes the cost of freedom. To be an artist, Stephen must not only reject the church and the family, but also sever the bonds of friendship that sustain his humanity. Cranley's calm questioning, patient, compassionate, yet unyielding, underscores Joyce's belief that art and morality, though opposed, remain intertwined. Through him, Joyce reminds readers that every act of liberation carries a shadow of loss. Stephen's non serviam resonates more powerfully because Cranley's voice, the voice of understanding, of conscience, of friendship, still echoes in the silence he leaves behind. Cranley, therefore, stands as the moral double of the artist, the last echo of the society Stephen must transcend, and the final human bond that gives his departure both necessity and pathos.